The station hung in the cold emptiness of space above the pale moon, like a silent giant of steel and glass, its surface covered in scars from past battles and years of service. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil and recycled air, and the distant hum of power generators never stopped. The people who lived here moved with purpose, carrying tools, crates, and weapons along narrow corridors, while the great observation windows showed nothing but darkness and stars. In one corner of the docking bay, far from the busy crews, a young alien girl struggled to lift a heavy crate. Her thin arms trembled. Her breathing came fast, her face pale under the faint light. Her hair was long and uneven, as if it had been cut in haste. Her clothes were simple and worn, and one sleeve was torn at the shoulder. She bent her knees and tried again to lift the crate, her fingers gripping hard, but it was too heavy. It slipped and thudded onto the floor. No one turned to look. Her name was Lyra. She had been here for months, ever since her transport limped into the station with half its crew gone and the rest wounded. She had been placed among her own people in the alien section of the station, but they kept their distance. When she walked past them, they looked away or whispered behind her back. The words coward and disgrace followed her like shadows. She had stopped trying to explain herself long ago. Now she kept her head down and her voice low. She worked when given work. She stayed silent when ordered to be silent, and she learned to survive in the empty spaces between others. At the far end of the bay, a human engineer was fixing a power junction. His name was Evan. He was new to the station, fresh from a posting on one of the human colonies, and still adjusting to the mixed crew here. He had noticed Lyra before once when she carried a toolbox across the deck. Her steps slow and unsteady now. As he watched her struggling with the crate, he frowned and set down his tools. It was strange that no one offered to help her when the crate fell again. She stood still for a moment, as if deciding whether to try one more time or to leave it where it was and face the punishment for failing. Evan walked over, his boots clanging lightly on the metal floor. He bent and lifted one side of the crate, easily with his stronger build. Lyra looked up, startled, her large dark eyes locking on his face for a moment. There was something there, a flicker of light deep within, like a faint glow that seemed to shift and swirl before it faded. He thought it might have been a trick of the light, but it left an impression. She spoke softly, almost too soft to hear. "Thank you." But her tone was not warm. It was guarded, as if she was not sure why he had helped. He smiled and shrugged, saying nothing more. They moved the crate together to a stack against the wall. When it was done, she stepped back quickly and walked away without another word. But Evan found himself watching her go. The days on the station passed in a steady rhythm, but Evan's mind returned to that moment again, and again he began to notice how she moved through the corridors, staying close to the walls, avoiding groups. How her hands were skilled when she worked with tools, but she always kept them half hidden under her sleeves. She never joined the others in the mess hall, instead taking her food to a quiet corner. Sometimes he thought he could see that strange light in her eyes again, but it was gone before he could be sure. One evening he found himself in the supply room, looking for a replacement part for a damaged pump. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to see Lyra entering with a small list in her hand. She glanced at him but said nothing. He decided to speak, asking if she had been on the station long. She paused, as if weighing whether to answer before saying only long enough. Her voice carried a tired weight. He wanted to ask more, but her body language warned him she did not like questions. That night, Evan overheard a group of alien workers talking in their own tongue. He understood only fragments, but he caught her name and the word failure repeated more than once. Their tone was harsh and mocking. He did not like the sound of it, and it made him think again about the way she avoided everyone. He wondered what had happened to make her people turn on her so completely. 2 weeks later, news spread through the station. A pirate fleet had been spotted on the far side of the moon, heading toward the trade routes. The human command officers ordered all crews to prepare for possible attack. Soldiers checked weapons, engineers reinforced bulkheads, and technicians calibrated shield arrays in the alien section. The mood was tense, but Lyra moved quietly through the halls carrying out small maintenance tasks. No one gave her any part in the defense planning. She was told to keep out of the way, as if she were nothing more than an extra mouth to feed. That night, Evan found her sitting alone near the observation deck, looking out at the moon below. The pale light made her face seem even more delicate. She did not turn when he approached. He stood beside her in silence for a moment, before saying that everyone would have to be ready soon. She gave a short, bitter laugh without looking at him, ready for what she asked. "No one will ask me to do anything they think. I am useless." Evan studied her profile in the dim light and said, "Maybe they are wrong." She turned to look at him, and for the first time he saw the glow in her eyes. Clearly it was not a trick of the light. It was real and alive, shifting like liquid fire beneath the surface. It made the air between them feel charged. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. "You do not know me," she said quietly. "Maybe not," he replied, "but I know what I see." The hum of the station filled the silence again, and beyond the glass the stars burned cold and bright. Neither of them spoke for a long while, but in that moment, Evan knew there was more to Lyra than anyone here believed, and he also knew he wanted to find out the truth before it was too late. Morning cycle began with the soft shift of light across the station walls, the artificial day replacing the cool, dim tones of the night. System crew members moved through the narrow corridors with tools and datapads, their voices low but urgent. The news of the pirate threat had reached every section, and no one wanted to be caught unprepared. In the docking bay, the clang of metal echoed as maintenance crews reinforced the main airlocks, while the hum of shield generators grew louder in the background. Lyra walked along the edge of the bay with a list of tasks in her hand. She moved quickly but kept her gaze low. She was to deliver spare parts to storage compartments and check small repair panels on the outer walls. None of it was dangerous work. None of it was important, the kind of work given to someone the command did not trust. Her slim figure blended into the shadows at the side of the corridor. She passed human and alien soldiers without drawing attention, but she noticed every glance, every whisper, and every way people stepped aside without speaking to her. Evan was in the repair pit working on a damaged coolant line, his hands and clothes marked with grease. He spotted Lyra passing by and called to her. She hesitated before walking over, her eyes steady but guarded. He asked if she had been given any training for emergencies. Her answer was a short no. "They think I am better out of the way." Evan frowned, saying nothing more, but something in her tone stayed in his mind. She did not sound hurt anymore. She sounded used to it, like a wound that had healed the wrong way. Later that cycle, he saw her in the mechanical wing, crouched beside a console, her hands moving with quick precision as she replaced a burnt circuit board. He watched quietly for a moment, noticing how she checked each connection twice, her fingers steady and sure it was clear. She knew what she was doing. When she finished, she glanced up and caught him watching her. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she expected him to question her, but instead he only said, "You are good at that." She gave no reply, only stood and walked away, leaving him with more questions than answers. The next day, the tension across the station grew. Supply ships were recalled, defense crews were doubled, and the command center broadcast regular updates in clipped voices. Lyra overheard a group of human soldiers discussing the pirates. They spoke of stealth ships, fast raids, and no mercy. One of them noticed her listening and told her sharply to mind her own business. She left without answering, but in her chest she felt the familiar weight of frustration. She had lived through worse than pirates, but no one here wanted to believe it. That night, Evan found her again in the observation deck, the wide glass showing the pale surface of the moon and the deep dark of space beyond. She was sitting on the floor, knees pulled close, staring into the distance. He walked over slowly, asking if she ever missed her home. Her answer was a long pause, followed by a quiet, "Yes, but it is not mine anymore." The words were heavy with meaning. Evan sat down beside her, waiting for her to say more. After a moment, she spoke in a low voice, telling him a piece of her past. She had been a scout in her people's fleet, tasked with finding safe passages through asteroid fields and enemy lines during A border conflict on one mission. Her orders were to guide the fleet directly to the target, but she had detected civilian transports in the path. They were marked as enemy supply, but she knew they were not soldiers. She had broken orders and diverted the fleet, costing them the element of surprise. The command blamed her for the failure and the lives lost in the battle. That followed. No one cared that she had saved hundreds of civilians, only that she had disobeyed. Evan listened without interrupting. He saw the way her hands tightened in her lap as she spoke, and the way her voice shook slightly. Though her face stayed calm when she finished, she turned her gaze back to the stars, saying, "They will never forgive me, and maybe they are right." Evan shook his head softly, saying, "Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone." Her eyes flickered with that strange inner light again, and he thought she might say something more, but the moment passed and she fell silent. The following day brought the first signs of trouble. Sensors picked up faint energy signatures near the moon's shadow. The command announced that it was likely a scout ship from the pirate fleet. Human soldiers began setting up barricades in the main corridors. Alien guards armed themselves with plasma rifles, and the engineering crew worked to strengthen shield coverage. Lyra moved among them, carrying equipment, but never being asked to join any defense group. Evan crossed paths with her twice, each time seeing the same quiet determination in her movements, like someone preparing for something unseen. That evening, alarms sounded through the station, a sudden warning that enemy craft had been spotted moving toward the trade lane. Escorts were scrambled to intercept, but the pirates were too fast for normal sensors to track. The human fighters took heavy fire in the opening moments. Reports came in of cloaked ships striking supply vessels before vanishing from the scanners. In seconds, panic stirred in the corridors as the reality of the threat reached the crew. Lyra stood in a shadowed corner watching the maps update on a nearby screen, her eyes scanning faster than most people could follow. Evan ran past her with a come in hand, heading toward the hangar. He stopped briefly to tell her to get to the safe zone, but she shook her head. "I can see where they are," she said, her voice low but firm. He looked at her in surprise. "You can see them?" She nodded, her eyes glowing faintly. "I can feel the energy of their drives. It leaves a trace no scanner can read." Evan hesitated, the sound of distant gunfire echoing faintly through the walls, before saying, "Then you need to tell command." She shook her head. "They will not listen to me, but youth." Alarms continued to pulse, red light flashing along the corridor walls. The station vibrated faintly from a distant impact. Evan met her gaze and saw no fear, only resolve. He understood in that moment that Lyra was not helpless. She was holding something back, something powerful and dangerous, and she was ready to use it if given the chance. Without another word, he motioned for her to follow him toward the command wing, and together they began moving through the chaos toward the one place where her knowledge might make the difference between survival and destruction. The command wing was alive with motion. Officers shouted across the room as maps and data flashed on the tall screens. The air was tense and filled with the sound of chatter, reports of pirate ships moving faster than expected and striking from nowhere. The human captain stood in the center, giving orders to launch more fighters and redirect shield power to the forward sections. Evan stepped through the doorway with Lyra close behind her. Gaze swept across the displays, and she knew instantly that the enemy was already inside the defensive ring. The captain saw Evan, but his attention stayed on the battle until Evan spoke quickly, saying, "There was someone who could track the cloaked ships." The captain looked at Lyra and frowned, clearly remembering her reputation. One of the alien officers muttered under his breath that she was not to be trusted, but Evan pressed on, saying she could sense the enemy drives and ways. No scanner could match. The captain's hesitation lasted only a moment as another alarm sounded, indicating a pirate strike on the cargo bays. He gave her a single chance. "Prove it," he said. Lyra moved toward the tactical screen, her eyes glowing faintly as she focused. She could feel the faint ripples of energy through the station walls, like heat currents in the air. She raised a hand, pointing to empty space on the display, saying, "One ship here, moving fast toward The rear docks another here, circling to flank before anyone could question her. 2 alerts flashed. Confirming her call, the captain's eyes narrowed, but he gave the order to redirect interceptors to those points within seconds. The fighters engaged the enemy and forced them to retreat from those positions. The room went quiet for a moment as the realization spread she had been right. The captain ordered her to stay on the tactical platform and keep calling out enemy positions, her voice steady. She guided the defense teams, step by step, intercepting more pirate ships before they could cause major damage. The human and alien crews followed her directions without argument. Now their survival depended on it. Evan stayed near the door watching the shift in the room as disbelief turned to respect, at least for the moment. But the pirates adapted quickly, using more advanced cloaking patterns and decoys to confuse sensors. Lyra's eyes narrowed as she concentrated harder, the strain beginning to show in the tightness of her jaw. She could still track them, but it required more focus. Her words came faster as she directed multiple teams across the station. The battle raged outside, flashes of light from laser fire and explosions reflecting through the viewing ports. The sound of impacts shook the walls as the shields absorbed hit after hit. Then, a sudden shockwave rolled through the station, knocking several people to the floor. The lights flickered and the screens glitched. The captain shouted for damage reports, and the answer came quickly. A pirate boarding party had breached the lower hangar corridor. Human soldiers were already moving to intercept, but they were outnumbered. Lyra's eyes darted to the screen, tracing the faint signature of the boarding craft. She stepped down from the platform without asking permission and told Evan to come with her. She was going to the hangar. He hesitated only long enough to grab a sidearm before following her into the corridor. Lower levels of the station were chaos, the air thick with smoke from a ruptured conduit. Red emergency lights flashing along the walls. They moved quickly, stepping over fallen debris until the sound of weapons fire grew louder ahead. Soldiers exchanged fire with armored pirates whose visors glowed red. Lyra pressed against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment to sense the enemy movement. She pointed down a side passage, saying, 3 more coming from the left. The human squad leader glanced at Evan, who nodded, and the soldiers shifted position just in time to ambush the incoming pirates as they pushed forward. Lyra kept guiding the squad, using her senses to track hidden enemies through walls and bulkheads. Each time her directions proved accurate, the soldiers' trust in her grew. They reached the breached hangar where a pirate gunship was docked, its engines still humming as more troops prepared to unload. Lyra scanned the space quickly, her gaze locking on a shimmering distortion near the far wall. She shouted for the soldiers to fire at that spot, and a cloaked figure appeared under the hail of plasma bolts, falling to the ground with a heavy thud. Pirates fought hard, but with Lyra's guidance, the humans were able to hold the line, finally forcing the survivors back into their gunship, which pulled away from the hangar under heavy fire. The doors sealed, and the alarms shifted from boarding alert back to external defense. The squad leader looked at Lyra with a mix of exhaustion and respect, saying they could not have held without her. She gave a small nod but said nothing, turning to leave as if the praise meant little to her. Back in the command wing, the captain received the report of her actions, his expression unreadable but his orders clear. She was to remain at the tactical post for the remainder of the battle, with direct authority to redirect defensive units. Evan could see she was tired, her hands trembling slightly from the strain, but her focus never wavered, the glow in her eyes stronger now, like living fire beneath the surface. She stood over the tactical display, calling out enemy vectors until the last pirate craft in range was driven off. When the alarms finally went silent, the room felt strangely still. The crew began their work of assessing damage and tending to the wounded. The captain approached her, and after a long pause simply said, "Well done." It was not much, but coming from him, it carried weight. Lyra gave a brief nod before stepping away from the screens. Evan caught up with her in the corridor, telling her that she had just saved the station. She looked at him with an expression he could not read and said, "They will forget by tomorrow. People do not change so quickly." Wanted to argue, but before he could, the comm systems crackled with a priority alert. The pirate fleet had pulled back, but not far. Sensors showed a massive energy signature moving in from deep space, something far larger than the ships they had just fought. The captain's voice came over the channel, ordering all crews to prepare for a second wave. Lyra stopped walking and turned to the observation port, her reflection faint in the glass, her voice barely above a whisper. That is no ordinary ship. Evan followed her gaze, and his chest tightened. A massive dreadnought was sliding into view, its dark hull blotting out the stars, and its weapons charging for the kill. Dreadnought moved with slow, deadly grace, its hull black as deep space, its edges marked with faint red lines of energy that pulsed like the heartbeat of some vast living thing. Every cannon poured along its flanks glowed with the rising charge of heavy plasma the station's shields had held against the smaller ships. But this vessel was built to crush cities in orbit. The moment it came into range, the balance of the battle would shift, and the station would be nothing more than twisted metal drifting in silence inside the command wing. The air was thick with urgency. The captain barked orders to reroute all power to shields and weapons. Squads were redeployed to defensive positions, and every available fighter was scrambled. Evan stood near the tactical display as Lyra stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the approaching giant. She could feel the hum of its engines even from here, a deep thrumming that resonated in her chest. Her gift was not only sight but something deeper. She could read the patterns of energy as if they were living currents, and this ship carried power beyond anything she had sensed before. She spoke quietly but firmly, telling the captain the dreadnought would not attack from a distance. It was moving in to board and destroy from within. Its weapons were a distraction meant to pin the station in place, while its hidden assault teams struck at weak points. The captain studied her for a moment, then ordered all internal sensors to maximum sensitivity. But she shook her head, saying their cloaks were too advanced for machines. She could find them, but only if she was close enough to feel the distortion. Directly, Evan stepped closer, asking what she meant. She turned to him and said she needed to get aboard the dreadnought to mark its weak points from inside with her guidance. The human fighters could strike with precision and disable its engines and main reactor before it destroyed the station. The captain immediately refused, calling it suicide. But Lyra's expression did not change. She reminded him that without such a strike, the station would fall within the hour. The argument hung heavy in the air until a fresh alert came through, showing the dreadnought increasing speed and closing the gap. The captain's voice dropped low as he gave her reluctant permission, but only if she had a human escort. Lyra looked to Evan. He nodded without hesitation, his voice steady as he said he was going with her. She tried to argue that it was her mission, but he refused to step back, saying if she was going into the heart of the enemy, she would not go alone. She held his gaze for a moment before giving a single sharp nod. Preparations moved quickly. The hangar crews readied a small stealth transport, while the armory officers loaded them with light weapons and portable comm units. Lyra checked each piece of gear with practiced efficiency. Though she had not worn combat harness in years, the weight on her shoulders felt both strange and familiar. Evan noticed the way her hands lingered on the grip of her sidearm and the faint tremor that passed through her. Before she steadied herself, they boarded the transport, and the hangar doors opened, spilling cold starlight into the bay. Before the ship slipped silently into the dark, the journey across open space was short but tense. The dreadnought loomed larger with each passing moment, its surface covered in armored plates, each one the size of a building they approached from. Beneath its shadow, where fewer weapons were mounted and the transport's stealth systems masked their presence, Lyra sat in silence, eyes closed, reading the shift in energy flows inside, the ship mapping them in her mind. When she opened her eyes, she pointed to a narrow maintenance hatch near the engine cluster, saying they would enter there and move toward the reactor core, avoiding main corridors where patrols would be heavy. The hatch opened with little resistance, and they stepped inside. The metal walls of the dreadnought were darker than the station's smooth alloy, rough with patches of heat from nearby conduits. The air smelled faintly of burning ozone and machine oil. Lyra led the way, moving with sure, quiet steps. Evan followed. Scanning the shadows with his weapon ready, they passed through tight crawl spaces and low-access tunnels, hearing the faint thud of distant footsteps above them. The deeper they went, the more intense the vibration of the engines became, until it was a constant pulse in the floor beneath their boots. Twice they were forced to hide as pirate patrols passed close, once crouching behind a stack of cargo containers as armored figures moved by, their visors glowing red in the dark. Lyra waited until the sound faded before signaling for them to move again. Finally, they reached a control chamber, overlooking the main reactor through a wide blast window. The core glowed bright white, wrapped in rotating rings of energy coils. Evan could feel the heat even from here. Lyra studied it with sharp focus, then began marking coordinates on her com to transmit to the human fighters outside. Her voice over the com was calm and precise. She guided the strike wings into position, directing them to hit shield nodes along the dreadnought's flanks within minutes. Explosions rippled across the outer hull as the human ships targeted exactly where she had pointed the dreadnoughts forward. Weapons began to flicker, its shield coverage dropping in sections, allowing more attacks through. But the pirates responded fast, sealing bulkheads and sending more troops toward the engine section. Lyra turned to Evan, saying they needed to plant a charge directly on the primary conduit to finish the job. They moved quickly down a service ladder to the base of the reactor, where the noise was deafening, the air thick with heat and the constant hiss of coolant systems. Lyra knelt and set the charge, her hands steady, even as distant alarms grew louder. Evan covered her from the shadows, taking down a pirate soldier who rounded the corner too quickly. The glow from the reactor lit Lyra's face as she armed the detonator and set the timer. She rose and turned to him, saying it was ready, but they had less than 3 minutes to get clear. The escape was a blur of running through narrow passages and climbing steep ladders, the sound of heavy boots behind them growing closer each moment. They burst through the maintenance hatch into the small transport. Evan sealed the door. As Lyra powered the engines, the transport shot away from the dreadnought, just as a deep tremor rippled through its massive frame. Through the rear view, they saw the reactor overload, the center of the ship glowing brighter and brighter until a silent wave of light burst outward, the blast tearing through its hull in a great, silent bloom of fire against the black. COM crackled with cheers from the station crews as the massive vessel broke apart, drifting in burning fragments. Lyra leaned back in her seat, breathing hard. Evan glanced at her and saw something in her eyes beyond the glow, a weight lifting, as if a chain she had carried for years had finally broken. But he also saw the exhaustion etched into her features and the faint tremor in her hands. The station was safe for now, but he knew the battle had cost her more than anyone else could see. The small transport glided back toward the station under the cover of darkness. The debris of the dreadnought still floated behind them like pieces of a shattered mountain, drifting in slow motion through the black void. Flashes of fire marked where smaller pirate craft had been caught in the blast, but the coms now carried only the steady voices of human fighters returning from pursuit missions. The danger was over for the moment. Inside the transport, Lyra sat in the co-pilot seat, her hands resting loosely on her knees, her breathing slow but deep. Evan watched her from the pilot's chair, seeing the faint shimmer still present in her eyes, though softer now, as if the energy within her had quieted. She turned her head slightly and gave him a small nod without words. It was her way of saying she was still here, still standing. The silence between them carried more than any speech could. When they docked in the hangar, the station crews were waiting, soldiers, engineers and medics standing together. As the two stepped out, the air smelled of hot metal and coolant from recent repairs. Voices rose in murmurs at the sight of Lyra. Many of those who had ignored her for months now stared openly, some with surprise, others with a quiet kind of respect. The human captain approached them, his uniform stained from hours in the command wing. He looked at her for a long moment before saying that without her the station would not have survived. There was no ceremony in his voice, only truth. Lyra inclined her head in acknowledgement, but she did not bask in the attention. She moved past the captain toward the observation deck. Evan followed, curious to see where she was going. The deck was quiet and dim, the great window showing the slow drift of debris against the distant stars. She stood close to the glass, her reflection faint, her eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for something far away. Evan stepped beside her and said she had done more than anyone could have asked her to do. She answered softly that she had only done what needed to be done. For a while they stood in silence until Evan asked if her people would hear of what she had done. Her shoulders shifted slightly as if the thought weighed heavy on her. She said they might, but it would not matter to them. They had already decided what she was and what she was not. Her voice did not tremble. It was calm and certain. He wanted to argue, but he realized she did not need their recognition anymore. She had already proved her worth, not to them, but to herself and to those who had fought beside her. The following days passed with the slow work of repair crews welding hull plates, sealing ruptured conduits, and restoring damaged systems. The mood across the station changed. Small gestures began to appear in the way others treated her. A soldier handing her a cup of water, an engineer asking her opinion on a sensor recalibration, a medic thanking her in passing. She responded politely, but never lingered long. She had never sought acceptance, and she would not begin now. Yet she carried herself differently. Now her steps were steadier, her gaze direct. Evan saw her often in the hangar assisting with repairs on the smaller fighter craft, her hands moving with the same precision he had noticed on his first day. He also saw the way the crews glanced at her, now not with suspicion, but with recognition. She was part of them in a way that could not be undone. The rumors that had once followed her had been drowned out by the memory of the battle and the victory she had helped secure. One evening, they stood again at the observation deck, watching a supply convoy depart toward the colonies beyond the moon. The stars stretched endlessly before them. Evan asked her if she planned to leave with one of the convoys. She shook her head slowly, saying there was still work to be done here. The station would face more threats, and she could help protect it. Her voice was firm, but there was a quiet warmth beneath it, a sign that she had found a place where her strength mattered. He smiled faintly, saying that he would stay as well. Someone had to make sure she did not take on every dangerous mission alone. She glanced at him with the smallest curve of a smile, a rare expression that carried more weight than words. They stood together in comfortable silence, the hum of the station around them, and the deep calm of space beyond the glass. Weeks later, when the next patrol returned from the outer sectors, they brought word that the pirate fleet had scattered leaderless without the dreadnought. Their raids had grown disorganized and weaker. The threat that had hung over the station was gone for now. The crew gathered in the central mess hall to share food and quiet celebration. There was laughter and music echoing through the metal corridors. Evan sat at a corner table watching Lyra from a distance. She was speaking with a group of engineers. Her posture relaxed, her hands moving lightly as she described something on the table in front of them. He realized that she belonged here now in a way she had not before. Later that night, when most had gone to rest, Lyra returned to the observation deck alone. Evan found her there, leaning lightly on the railing, her eyes fixed on the slow-turning moon. She spoke without looking at him, saying that when she had first come to the station, she had thought it would be the place where she faded into nothing, where her story would end unseen and unheard. Instead, it had become the place where she had fought again and won. Not only the battle, but herself. Evan stood beside her, watching the pale glow of the moon on her face. He told her that sometimes the places we expect nothing from are the ones that give us everything. She did not answer right away, but he saw her smile again, faint but real. They remained there together until the stars began to shift with the station's slow rotation. The silence between them, now a bond built from battle, trust, and survival. Lyra was no longer the broken alien girl no one believed in. She was the one who had seen the threat others could not, the one who had stepped into the heart of danger when it mattered most, the one who had proven that true strength was not in following orders blindly, but in choosing what was right even when the cost was high, and though the stars held countless worlds and countless dangers ahead. She knew that whatever came next she would face it with her head high, her steps steady, and her place in this vast human outpost secured not by their permission but by her own. The end.